Let me officially welcome you to the video of how to sew a suit sleeve. I'll be giving you hints on how to attach a suit sleeve to the borders. So you can see on the video I have a sleeve attached to the borders. I'll be giving you a hint on how to do that, but this video is not basically how to attach a sleeve to the borders. I'll be making subsequent videos series on suit making, and I'll be explaining that in details. But for now, I'll be going straight to the making of this suit sleeve you see on the screen. So as you can see, I'm turning it backwards. You can see the lining and the fabric are exactly of the same size. If you're making yours, you can be a little bit more careful by making the lining longer, but if you have experience, you will just make all the same size as you see me do on this particular video. So as you can see, the lining and the fabric are of the same size, so everything is just smooth, so you don't have issues where the lining is tight or even when the lining is too free. You can see the slit. That slit will also contain buttons, so sometimes we decide to put as much as 4, as much as 5, and even as less as 3. So in fixing your suit, the way it positions on your hand actually matters. So you see me on the video putting on the sleeve, that will give me a clear view of where the top of the sleeve should be on the shoulder part and where the down part would be. So when you are trying to attach your sleeve, you need a little knowledge on that as well. But this video is, like I said earlier, it's not basically on how to attach a sleeve, but I'll be giving you hints on that while we are working on this video. So just subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed. There are many videos coming up on suit series. I'm working on 3 different kinds of suits. I think this is a peak lapel suit. I'll be working on others. So just stay tuned and have a nice time. So welcome guys. The first thing we do will be to add interface on the bending lines. So the bending lines are actually 2 inches from the edge of the wrist, like cut out. So the interface we added must cover the 2 inches mark. So this is a smaller piece of the sleeve. So we've added interface to this. Now we also add interface to the bigger piece of the sleeve. Now this is the bigger piece of the sleeve, but for the bigger piece of the sleeve, we actually added interface on both sides. That's the wrist part and also the shoulder part. So as you can see, we also added interface, making sure it covers the 2 inches mark, which is the bending line, and the shoulder part, which will contain the joining parts of the sleeve to the shoulder. So after adding interface to the smaller and the bigger piece, we'll start joining the smaller and the bigger piece for the left and also for the right sleeve. We'll just do that by joining both on that line like that and make a stitch from the top of the wrist or the shoulder part down to the wrist part. Before we go on, let me make this clear. We are actually working on just one sleeve, and I think this is the left sleeve. So we are working on one sleeve. And the reason we are working on one sleeve is because we'll be using the right sleeve to actually cut out the lining. So you just don't work on both sleeves at the same time because you have to cut the lining before you even get to this stage of the work. So as you see me doing, I've actually trimmed off the excesses on both sides of the wrist. Now, both sides of the wrist is not actually the main job here. The main job is actually in the center of the wrist. That center part is where both sleeve will actually be really worked on because that part will contain some finishing that needs to be sewn inwards. So to start the inward sewing, you can see the way I bended everything. So I'll take my chalk and I'll chalk where the upper part meets the lower part. I will chalk it on the top and I will also chalk it down below. Now, everything I'm doing here right now, as you see me doing, is on the big piece of the suit sleeve, the big piece of the suit sleeve. So both points I chalked, I'll be joining. And in joining both points, you have to make sure you are joining it at the exact point you chalk. You just don't guess. So when you close both, you have to carefully look at it very well and make sure you will be stitching on the exact point at which both join because you don't want it to be shifted towards one direction. You want it to be at the middle of the joining. So I'll be taking my time to make sure both points are actually aligned. Then after that, I'll sew downwards to the edge of that line like that. So I'll be showing you the edge of the line. That's the edge of the line. That line, where that line ends. Where that line ends is actually the edge. So I will sew from the top of that mark point down to where that line ends. And after doing that, you can see what we got. It's just straightforward like that. So on sewing that, I can just bring it outwards and continue working, but it will form a lump inwards. So to prevent that lump, I'll just make a ½ inch trimming and trim everything ½ inch before the sewing line. And that will not be all. I'll still make a notch on the edge. So it will be easier for me to use my pressing iron to open the seam. When opening your seam, make sure you have water or you're actually using a steam iron. So you use a steam iron to press. Do that, you open it back outwards, and you have succeeded in creating the finishing for the big piece of the wrist of the suit sleeve. So on doing that, we've actually succeeded in finishing the big piece wrist part. So we'll go to the small piece. So just to make sure, you can use a pressing iron to just straighten out things before you go to the small piece. But for teaching purposes, I'll just go straight to the smaller piece. For the smaller piece, you just make a notch on the edge. Now, mind you, the bending is not on the same line. So when you bend it, don't try to force both of them to be on the same line. No, just bend it. Follow your 2 inches bending line downwards, and whatever it gives you, you sew on top. So as you can see, they are not on the same line. So after bending, I'll make a stitch from the top down to meet the edge of the inner bending, and I'll stop there. So as you can see, I've done that. Now after stitching, I'll just bring it outwards after taking a good notch on the edge like that. So I'll bring it outwards. Now there are many ways of doing this. There's a way I'll cut my suit sleeve. I'll not require trimming the edges of the wrist. I'll not also require bending both and both not being on the same line. That's why I say I'll be making numerous videos on how to make suits, and I'll be showing you different ways of doing mostly the same things and getting the same results. So as you can see, we've actually gotten the finishing of the wrist. So what just remains now is to use our pressing iron to press. If you like, you can put your button. If you like, you can put your button at this stage, but for teaching purposes, I'll just continue working and make sure we stay on track. So that's that. There are over 100 ways to cut your lining for your suit. but I will just show you one of the most dependable means. So as you can see, the bending of the suit sleeve is 2 inches, and you have to take that into cognizance when you're trying to cut the lining, because the lining will start from that line, that 2 inches line. So the first thing we'll do will be to make sure the lining is at least a half or a quarter inch longer than the sleeve when you place them side by side. So as you can see, I start my trimming from the top, from the shoulder, which is a quarter inch longer than the shoulder of the line of the fabric. But the most important thing here is to know where the sewing will start from, the stitching will start from, where the suit actually join the lining. The starting point of that joining is very, very important. So I'll be trimming the top. From the top, there is actually no problem where you start from. Just make sure it is at least a quarter or half inch longer than the fabric. Now, for where the stitching will start from, that you have to be very, very exact. So what I will do is, as you can see, I will bend it to that 2 inches point where the stitching is supposed to start from. Then I'll go half inch position higher than that line, because after the joining of both, half inch will actually be exhausted. So I will go a half inch higher, and all other parts of the suit sleeve, I'll make sure it is a quarter inch wider or even longer. So as you can see, for the big part of the sleeve, the big part of the suit sleeve, I've actually finished cutting off the lining. What I'll just do is just to make sure everything is just a quarter inch wider, because the wider it is, the more you will need to trim after you've succeeded in joining both lining of the sleeves, because you actually be cutting the lining for the smaller piece and also for the bigger piece. If you notice, what we actually do here is make sure we use one part of the suit sleeve to cut out the lining, and the other part we've already joined to show you more of the workings. So after doing all this, we've actually succeeded in cutting the lining for the big piece of our suit sleeve, considering all the joining points. Like I said earlier, there are over 100 ways, and most of those 100 ways involves what I call approximations. You are not really sure of what you're cutting. You just keep trimming and trimming until you get what you actually need. But for this method I show you, this is what we just give you the exact measurements and shape of what you actually want. So as you can see, the stitching started from the 2 inches point mark, and it ended at the quarter inch height, longer than that of the fabric. So we are sorted for the big piece lining. We'll be going straight to the cutting of the smaller piece lining. So what I would just advise is, when you're cutting your lining, you can make yours 1 inch or even a three quarter inch longer than the fabric of the big piece. For mine, I just make use of a quarter inch because I'm kind of used to this cutting. So we'll be going straight to the cutting of the lining for the smaller piece. It is almost the same process we used while cutting the big piece. What we'll just do is just to make sure we'll check our 2 inches folding mark. So as you can see, for this small piece, we've not even bend our small piece by the 2 inches bending mark. So we'll just go ahead and bend it. So after bending it, we'll just do exactly the same thing we did for the big piece in terms of the way we cut out the lining, which is just placing it a half inch longer than the position of the 2 inches bending, and making sure it is a quarter inch longer than it in terms of the height. So when you're making your suit, anything that has to do with bending, straightening, just make sure you add water to it when you are doing yours, because if you don't, it will be difficult for you to actually get what you want. So what I usually do is I usually sprinkle water. So for this, I'm just trying to cut off the lining, but if I'm focused on actually doing the work I really need to do in terms of sewing the suit and bending it, I'll definitely add sprinkles of water before using my pressing iron to straighten things. But for now, I just want to cut off the lining and I need my 2 inches bending mark. So I'll be trimming off all the excesses on the edges. And there are many ways of cutting a suit sleeve. There's a way you cut your suit sleeve, you will not even get those excesses I'm getting on the edges you see me trimming off. And that will be another way I'll show you when I'm making my next suit series video.
because after this video I'll be making another video on the suit series, and I'll be doing things exactly differently from the way I did everything I did on this video. So I'll be even cutting a double vent suit instead of a single vent suit I actually cut out for this video. So just do well to subscribe and follow up on things. So what I'll be doing now will be to show you exactly how I cut off the lining for the smaller piece of the sleeve, and it is exactly the same way I did for that of the big piece. Just make sure your 2 inches mark is known, then you bend. After you bend, make sure you don't cut at that exact position, but you cut a half inch longer than that position. So that's just that. So every other thing is just the same process.
After cutting out both lining, the next thing we'll do will be to join both lining. So on joining both linings, you just place them on the edge like that and make a stitch from the top down to the down line. No extra anything, just sew from the top down to the line, and you will succeed in joining the lining of the big piece and that of the small piece. So we've joined the lining and you can see the stitching line. We've also used our pressing iron to make a press and make it as smooth as possible. So the next thing will be to attach the lining now to the bodice. So as you can see, they are of the same shape, and that is if you actually correctly cut out yours to be exactly the way it should be, you should get the same shape, and the same shape also on the shoulder line, and the sewing line of the lining and the sewing line of the fabric should be aligned when you are trying to fix yours. You can use a pin to make some alignment before you even start joining, but that is not necessary if you are a bit careful. All you just need to do is hold it down like that, then turn it outwards. That is after making sure both are on the same sewing line. That's the sewing line of the lining and the sewing line of the fabric. So after joining it like that and turning it that way, you will stitch from the beginning there inwards to as deep as possible. So you just don't join with a straight line. So you stop there and you double stitch. So after double stitching, you bring it closer to the other piece now and extend the lining down to the other edge of the other piece. Now when it gets to the other edge, you start your stitching from the other edge now, and you stitch it to as deep as that can also go, and that is as simple as that. Then you open up and you would have succeeded in joining both. So as you can see, we succeeded in joining both. So the line is actually attached to the borders, to this suit sleeve fabric, and you can see both. So the only thing remaining for us to do now is to trim if necessary, but personally I don't advise you do so, because if you are trimming you can get carried away with your trimming. So what I will advise you is just join. If your lining is bigger than your fabric, it is safer, better, advisable, or whatever adjective I can use. But if your lining is shorter or smaller than your fabric, it becomes a problem. Like if you have experience, there are many ways you can cover for any issue. Like for example, if your lining is shorter, you can always make the lining of your fabric longer. That's the lining of the bodice of the suit longer. So, but if you don't have all those experience, if your lining becomes shorter, you have issues. So the next thing will just be to join from the top, get to that wrist part, and continue through the lining, and that will be that.